Attention economic developers. The unspoken secret of our industry is that responding to RFIs is time-consuming and often feels like a waste. You need SiteHunt. Dane has harnessed AI to do the heavy lifting for you. SiteHunt builds detailed building and sites databases and generates instant RFI responses, transforming tedious tasks into winning opportunities. Stop wasting time and start winning more projects. Visit sitehunt.io today. SiteHunt, where AI meets economic development.
Welcome to the Econ Dev Show. We explore the strategies, ideas, and insights that are driving economic development forward into the future. You'll hear new insights from passionate EDs about their successes and struggles, and you'll learn from attraction and retention experts about how to apply actionable strategies inside your EDO. We'll help take your organization, your community, and your career to the next level. Here's your host, Dane Carlson.
Welcome back to the Econ Dev Show. Today we're here with Josh Wright. Josh is the EVP of Growth at Lightcast, the leading provider of labor market data and insights. He works on thought leadership and strategic business development for the company's education and government division. He previously served as the EVP and GM of the Economic and Workforce Development Division at Lightcast. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dane. It's a privilege to be here.
Absolutely. When I saw that you were going to be a guest, I was so excited. I was so excited for two reasons. Number one, you're really cool, and I really like to talk to you, and I sort of cherish the time that we do get to talk.
Yeah.
But secondly, when I saw what we wanted to talk about, or what you wanted to talk about, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart that I have been sort of trying to raise awareness about. First with my wife, and then with my children, and then through the Econ Dev Show and the newsletter. This is such an overwhelming topic. So tell us why we're here today and what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Again, thank you. I'm excited to talk about this as well. Lightcast, which we're a labor market data company formerly known as MZ and Burning Glass. We've released a new report on what we're calling the demographic drought, or have been talking about this for a few years. This is the third version of our report. It's called The Rising Storm. It came out late September, and we are recording a few weeks into after releasing it, and we've gotten an amazing amount of questions and attention and downloads on this report because it's hitting the nerve for a lot of business leaders, community leaders, economic development leaders on the massive demographic shifts and disruption that's going to cause in the labor market, in our society as a whole, and what can be done about it. So again, this new report is called The Rising Storm, part of our demographic drought series, and excited to unpack it with you and the implications for economic developers.
Absolutely. And I think to some extent you're sort of bearing the lead, because it's the rising storm, building a future-ready workforce to withstand the looming labor shortage. And I think it's that labor shortage that, obviously this is what we're talking about, that is so just radically different than the environment we've been in through all of our lives, through our parents' lives, and through some of us, through our grandparents' lives. The United States has, existed in this time in which each generation is capable of filling the jobs that are needed to be done.
Exactly.
With the new generations. And now for the first time, you're predicting, and I've been saying, just looking at the numbers, this is not going to be the case, very, very soon. And technically it already isn't,
right,
as you mentioned in the report.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. Good point on burying the lead. I'm a former journalist, and that's a cardinal rule not to bury the lead. Correct. We're talking about the looming labor shortage, and you might say, some people may listen to this and say, hey, the jobs report has been, up and down, maybe a little softer. That maybe the economy, are we actually in a labor shortage? And I think the answer is yes, depending on the region and the sector. And what the report is showing, and it's backed by tons of data from government data sources, from our job posting analytics that I can get into, that shows that there is, given that massive retirement of baby boomers, the huge generation that was the baby boomer generation, those retirements that are already that COVID and the pandemic accelerated, and we're going to see more and more of those in the next 5 years, plus some other factors like our declining birth rate, declining prime age, workforce participation for men, especially. That this is going to be becoming. There's a coming storm. That really what we're saying is that we're on the outer bands of that storm, and we're starting to feel the effects, and we're going to start feeling it more and more in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that you're right, that COVID was the time, coming out of COVID, when we started to see it sort of started to accelerate. The baby boomers, maybe there were some who thought, this is nice, I'm enjoying this time at home, and I'm just going to stay at home. I'm not going to go back to work when this is all over. And that sort of reiterates the idea that, the baby boomers were born 1946 to 1964.
Right.
It's a nice and easy set of numbers to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And if you add 65 to 1964, you get 2029, 5 years from now. So in 5 years, all the baby boomers will be 65 or older. And they're such a huge part of our labor pool. They're the single largest piece. Well, technically they're not the largest piece anymore, but just until very recently, they were the largest piece of our labor market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's pretty phenomenal. There were 76 million baby boomers. And it was not just the size of the baby boomer generation, but there's been a lot of talk and research about this as well, of the wealth that those baby boomers captured and collected, and the influence, the seniority, all of that the implications of those retirements is more than just sheer, butts and seats, so to speak, more than just people in a role. There's a lot of expertise that comes with those baby boomers, and all of the wealth that they've generated is going to have a ripple effect as well, because our research is showing that parts of the younger generations who are not working is because they're getting wealth handed down to them from the baby boomers. And there are lots of other factors that go into that is going to make that there's reasons for why we're seeing a declining labor force participation rate in general as well. And so the very formidable generation of baby boomers are. But when what our research shows very clearly is that when you combine the retirements of those baby boomers with our declining birth rate, we've been way below the replacement rate, 2.1 for birth rate for a long time in America, and other countries are far worse than us. That we're not going to be able to sustain this high level of productivity in the labor in the economy, because we're going to have fewer and fewer workers, and that's just it's a simple math problem. Like you said, you started doing the math for the retirements. It's really becomes a math problem, and a calculation. Like it's not a fact. It's not a subjective thing. It's objective math here that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned, other countries, and yes, other countries, we're already seeing it. If you read any European news, you see it. Europe is massively struggling because they're so far ahead of us, because their millennial generation is so much smaller than ours, that these effects are already beginning to, really have dramatic impacts on their economies. So yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because there's just so many pieces that play into this. I mean, even things that aren't workforce related. You mentioned, their wealth and their capital, and yeah, some of them are going to be passing some of that wealth down, and so that's going to pull people out of the labor force. But some of their wealth is still tied up in, is still growing, is still in the stock market ultimately. And as they retire and want to move into safer investments, they're going to begin taking that money more and more out of the stock market. What impact does that have? What impact does that have on our, the investment market in this country? All that kind of stuff. It's just such an interesting sort of phenomenon that, again, has never existed. We're always planning for there to be more people, there to be more jobs. And I don't know, as a Gen Xer, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic, because on one hand, this is opening up a lot of leadership positions in organizations, because as you mentioned, the boomers sort of stayed. They didn't leave those generations they didn't leave those positions in the same way that their parents did, starting in maybe the 90s at the rate that we would have expected. But yeah, no. So you also mentioned that we should already be below. From the report, what is the reason that the labor force doesn't appear to be shrinking thus far?
Part of that is because we're not feeling that there hasn't been the full effect of the retirements yet. There have been, through COVID, there's been estimated 5 million. We lost really quickly, just 5 million workers from accelerated retirements, people dropping out, all those kinds of things. So we felt it very, very clearly during COVID, where that you sensed in 2022, at record level job openings from the JOLT survey that then sparked inflation, all of those types of things. So we started seeing it, and then it started to stabilize, right? And in the last year or so, the labor market started to cool, openings go down, the Great Resignation ends. And so you started to see it stabilize, but we've already seen a little snippets of what is coming because, again, accelerated through COVID, stabilizes. And then as this boomers start to age out more and more, and there's actually research that show that there are people retiring. The average retirement age is around 65, but there's actually it's declined. People are starting to retire earlier. That doesn't mean everybody is. There are, of course, cases of people going into their late 60s, early 70s, depending on the role, wanting to continue to work and do other things, mentor, and lots of cool mentorship programs and other things that communities should be thinking about as boomers retire. How can they leverage their expertise? At the same time, what's pretty clear right now is that we are just, again, feeling little effects here and there, depending on the sector, the industry, and depending on the region and how reliant they are on certain sectors. To use the storm analogy, obviously we're in hurricane season, a lot of tragic effects in the southeast of these hurricanes. So we want to be careful with this analogy, but at the same time, it is a apt analogy in the sense that we're starting to feel, there's this talk of the silver tsunami. I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Lotman, one of the kind of a futurist thought leader in the economic development.
Oh, sure.
Mark, for over 10 years ago, wrote a book around it predicted that this was coming, rightly predicted, and was talking about this as silver tsunami. I'll be honest, I like Mark. I've talked to him a lot. And when I first read it, I'm like, oh yeah, silver tsunami, that's something that it's going to come maybe down the road. But now we're feeling that, and we haven't felt the full effects. We also haven't felt the full effects of the declining birth rates because we had so many young people for quite a while. But the demographic cliff is coming, and the number, again, it's a math problem that we're seeing in other countries because the fewer young people that are born mean that there are fewer students. That mean that colleges, there's already increased closures of small colleges. We're hearing about I think average of 1 or 2 a week that close now. We're seeing this enrollment. So that's called, in higher education, they call that the enrollment cliff that's coming from, but this broader demographic cliff because of the declining birth rates is coming as well. And then then there's the other societal factors that we talk about in the report a lot. Highly recommend diving into the report to see. We talk about opioid addictions, incarceration, the mass incarceration that we've had, all of these big things that are impacting, that have a major impact, especially on prime age young men. So the prime age workforce is 25 to 54, and there has been a precipitous decline, a drop in the labor force participation for prime age working men. And so that has a massive impact as well, because a lot of the key jobs that our communities rely on, if you think of food service, agriculture, healthcare, other things, are dependent on young workers being able to be strong and capable and taking and sustaining those jobs that help sustain our communities, whether it's a rural community or a mid-sized community or urban community. And so there are massive implications for economic development. It is part of this because it's going to be harder and harder to fill those jobs, those less glamorous jobs that are really, really important for communities. Healthcare is a lot of those fields are female dominated. And there's going to be, there's already massive shortages felt in the healthcare sector. We can talk about that. But in those other jobs, skilled trades, blue collar, again, kind of like the jobs, agriculture and other jobs that come around, the really, really important jobs in keeping us fed, keeping us safe, the EMTs, paramedics, city workers, all of those types of jobs. Those are already not super glamorous, not super high paid, and are going to become harder and harder to fill based off of the composition of those jobs and the composition, the demographic makeup of America.
Yeah, the bit about the incarceration and addiction crisis, that was so interesting. That it was something like nearly 5 million. I think it was like 4.5 million men, or primarily men, primarily prime-aged men, were out of the workforce because they were in jail or prison or because of drugs. And I mean, that's 5 million people. That's an enormous city.
Exactly.
That's huge,
Right.
right? Wow. That is incredible. And to speak to all the other things you mentioned, to say all those cliffs and all of those jobs, but to say nothing about the fact that prime age individuals, families, men and women both, they're the ones who spend the money. They're the ones who are buying the goods and services in our communities, because they're the ones, that have families, that have new homes, that have, all of those things. They're in the prime spending years. The retirees, they're not spending money. I mean, to the same degree, they're not,
right,
going out and buying things, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This paradigm that we talk about and the report are producers versus consumers. If you think about it, there are producers and there are consumers. And there is a mix there. We go into this in the report. It's not a binary thing. There can be young people who are producing, who are making, are adding value, adding to the GDP, value added of the economy. They're also consumers because they buy goods and services as well. But as the population gets older and older, there are people who are going to become just consumers and aren't producing in the economy. And that balance it's really important to have that balance be not out of whack. And when you have so many more consumers than producers, it's going to spell problems for the labor market, for the broader U.S. economy, for our economic competitiveness writ large. And so it's a fine balance right now, and it's going to become more of a struggle. There are 1.4 million prime age men who are behind bars. That roughly equals the city populations of Atlanta, Miami, and Minneapolis combined. If you just look at just the city population of those, not the metro populations, but just the city. Those are prime age men, 25 to 24, just incarcerated. That doesn't include all the opioid deaths, the tragic rise in opioid deaths, and people out of the labor force due to opioids. There's also some startling research that shows that people who are just not or less productive because of alcohol abuse or drinking, that equates to over the people hours that adds up to is roughly over 100,000, equivalent of 100,000 people in the labor market. So there's the societal effects that this report gets into as well. We try to be careful and nuanced in those subjects because we are not experts in that, but we lean on a lot of very reputable research. What we lean on, especially though, is our labor market bona fides. We've been working and looking at labor market data for over 25 years now as MG and Burning Glass. We know the intricacies of the labor market, how the data is collected, how labor force participation is measured, how all of these surveys work. We don't have a perfect system in the U.S. about how to capture these, but we have the best system in the world in terms of no other country has the data that we have on all the different elements of the labor market. And we can see really clearly when we combine that labor market data with the demographic data that there's problems ahead. And we're not here to alarm, but we are here to inform and how to help our clients, how to help communities adapt and be agile through this. Those are the two kind of big themes of the report: inform, don't alarm, and anticipate and adapt. So how can we help communities anticipate and adapt to these things?
All right. Well, then I guess that's a good point. Let's kind of shift gears and say, what do we do? You're in a community, you're planning for the next decade. How do you plan for this? What do you do? How do you prepare? How do you build a future-ready workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think there's a few things that we dive into the report, and we have an addendum report focused for government and education leaders specifically. And I'm happy to share those resources with you offline to make sure that your listeners have that as well. But that report goes into a number, that compendium to the report goes into a number of strategies. Those strategies are particularly focused on thinking globally, but acting locally. And this is the power of what, really strong economic development organizations are doing already. And that is partnering with their education systems and workforce systems to know, how do we make sure that our labor market is as aligned as possible to local workforce demand? How do we know and stay attuned to these needs of employers and the changing needs of employers? Because I think a part of the strength of economic developers is being able to be attuned not just to what's happening now, but be future oriented to say, hey, you know what? There's changes coming. Let's help our employers think about those as well. And how do we help our companies, whether it's small and medium sized businesses or larger businesses, adapt to those changing needs? So part of this is being data informed, skills focused, understanding the changing focus of the needs of those of their employers, from being not just, are they requiring too many job postings require degrees, when they could just look at some skills and say, you know what, we can have a really smart upskilling or reskilling strategy, and not just thinking like we're just going to go right to a traditional old school methods of finding talent. So thinking locally or thinking globally, acting locally, and being skills first around recruitment strategies, upskilling and reskilling strategies are two of the things that we talk about and help our clients with a lot. And so those I would start with those. And then there's a bunch more around attracting worker, being a place that you to be a community where people want to live. And so any good talent attraction strategy is also tied to place, the community itself and how attractive it is, and how you're developing and attracting that talent is really important. So I'll stop there, because I think there's a lot that we could unpack in each of those. But those are the big things that when we talk to communities, we're trying to help them think, how are you developing? Are you being really robust in developing a skills ecosystem? Skills-based, skills-first ecosystem? Are you thinking about how you're attracting it? Are you purposely going out and attracting talent? Because if you're not attracting talent, it's going to be really hard to attract companies. And how are you developing and retaining the existing talent that you have already?
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about those. So in that upskilling sort of and reskilling sort of idea, and going and talking to your businesses and saying, hey, maybe you don't need college degrees for these. Maybe the reason you can't fill this position is because you have listed that it's a college degree. Are we seeing, you talked about this earlier, that many of these jobs, these sort of blue collar kinds of jobs, are the ones that are getting harder and harder to fill. So those two things go together, I'd imagine, that we need, for the longest time, everybody was told, grow up, go to high school, go to college, get your bachelor's degree. And it does seem like that's not a differentiator anymore. Doesn't set you apart in maybe the same way it did for the baby boomers. So is that's something that you're seeing, and that's something that needs to be taken into consideration?
Yeah, 100%. I think what we're realizing is, again, there are a lot of these jobs that are going to be critical, and that AI, I know your newsletter, your email, I think you're one of the great follows on social media and in your emails to track some of these trends as well, Dane. I think there's a lot of talk about the impacts of AI on the labor market. There's a lot of talk about, okay, immigration. We go into this in the report. There's things where where there's been the focus is where actually the job that are going to impact the role that we actually are going to, here's one way to put it. Sorry, let me reframe this a little bit to make it easier. The jobs that are going to be most in demand are actually where higher education and AI are not focused right now. There are sub-bachelor's level degree occupations They're skilled trade, the blue collars, their food service, their agriculture. They're the jobs that people don't want to do. And they're the jobs that AI is not well equipped to do right now. If you think about it,
Sure.
AI is coming after a more white collar, IT, marketing type jobs. And I think even then, my take is that they're going to be more of an enhancer, a augmenter than a full on disruptor. And that's that's maybe a controversial statement, maybe not. It depends on the research, depends on the acceleration of some of this technology. So if we think about where AI is focused, where higher education is focused, isn't where actually the biggest focus needs to be. And that is, how do we do these type of work? Who's going to do the work for the jobs that people don't want to do? And so for what it means for degrees and higher education, to get back to your question, I think it puts a lot of pressure on higher education to be that much more relevant, to be that much more focused on micro-credentials, on skills-based, small, focus, kind of more agile and adaptable kind of types of education that tie into this whole view of lifelong learning. Adult learners, the older people, how can you help them become more adaptable to build a future-ready workforce? And if that happens, whether it's a higher education institution partnering with someone like a Coursera to develop a micro-credential program, or aligning or, investing more in community college programs that are doing a really nice job in this, that then becomes something that's like, okay, you can get behind. I think that's something that people feel like, oh, that makes sense, because that's where a lot of the demand's going to be for these kinds of jobs, whether it's nursing, CNA workers, again, more on the blue collar jobs that our society is going to need, and that's where the demand is going to be.
It is so interesting. I mean, you mentioned earlier that, you're already seeing, because of this, this cliff in higher education, you're seeing small colleges closing. And if you have a small college in your community and it closes, that is absolutely devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that all these things sort of go together, because if that small college had sort of pivoted maybe to some of these other more timely skill sets, maybe they wouldn't have had to have closed. And then the community would be better equipped to take on the challenges that it's going to be facing in the future.
Exactly. The shortages one way to think about this is the shortages in the skilled trades will drive up the wages from a supply and demand perspective. If there are fewer workers,
right,
you have to pay those people more. Those people don't need a bachelor's degree to do those skilled trades jobs. And if you think of that, because of that, there'll be more pressure on higher education to demonstrate economic returns for their constituents, for the people, to justify paying that for that tuition, and the time spent on campus. So that's a downward pressure on the perception of higher education, on the value of higher education. And we look at that a lot. We have a whole team that does we look at socioeconomic impact analysis for higher education, for the ROI of those degrees. That's something that EMSI started. Our company really was founded on the MZ side, and then we merged with Burning Glass and looked at who was also looking at these trends and value of those degrees from a different perspective, and pioneered this notion of looking at real-time labor market intelligence for job postings. So we have a lot of expertise on this, and there is a downward pressure on that's going to be at least on the perception of higher education right now. So to your point, so for any community that has some of those small colleges, or that has some of these even big universities, I think it's a hard conversation to be having, but it's a good conversation to be having in terms of like, hey, are we making sure that your institution is as relevant as possible? And how are you driving that relevancy to meet the needs, this changing needs of the labor market? And sometimes it's taking down, it's sometimes having those conversations around sometimes what can be sacred cows or hard conversations to be having, but it's important to have, because I think we're seeing more and more universities. When we started doing this with looking at labor market data, most universities didn't want to touch this data or didn't want to really think about this, except for the kind of, some of the really pioneering out of bleeding edge universities, for-profit or online universities. And now we're seeing more and more universities, whether they're in continuing professional education, adult education, whatever else, looking at this and saying, oh, wow, we have to provide relevant training, or else we're not going to be relevant ourselves. And how that looks over time, I think I'm not a futurist. I'm not going to predict what it looks like in 10 or 20 years, but higher education is going to have to adapt. And I would tell you listeners who are more in economic development, your economic development organizations are going to have to adapt. Workforce systems are going to have to adapt. And I think it's important to think big and think differently, because dabbling on the edges isn't going to really solve some of these problems.
Right. Yeah. It's not going to move the needle. We all say that, in economic development, none of us thought we were going to have to deal with workforce and childcare and housing. And yet that's where it's going to be. It's all workforce all the time, for the next decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's workforce. I mean, years ago, Brookings labeled the term talent is the new economic development. And
right.
That was a Brookings Metro report that came out several years ago. And I think that was well articulated. And now you're seeing more and more, like you said, housing is the new economic development, childcare. And I also think focused on even simple, valuing every human is something that we thought, talked a lot about during COVID, right? We should value every person, whether we're the drive-through at McDonald's, having, respect and care for people who are overwhelmed at a restaurant or overwhelmed at a hospital. But it's also, I think every human has that potential to make, to invest in and to make a difference in. And so I think there's a lot of small scale programs that should be, it may say, oh, we're actually not really thinking, we're not solving a major problem. But every individual and every program that even hits on, hey, we're going to just train 10 new people or 5 new people or 1 new person, that's going to make a difference in this new world that we're living in as well.
Right. It's all these little pieces put together, everybody sort of working in the same direction so that we can accomplish this. But it's the little pieces at the local level, right? Like you said, think globally and act locally, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just one little thing about that. The Georgetown University they have a center called the Center on Education in the Workforce, and they do great research around these issues. And they released a recent report that talks about this, that every issue fundamentally is a local issue because labor markets are local by nature. There's a lot of talk about the jobs report every month. In my world, at least, I think you probably track it as well. I mean, sure. Economic developers, business leaders track the jobs number, right? But I heard Julia Lane from New York University, NYU. There's a great interview with her about AI and how we track the labor markets. And Julia said, it's a little bit like, you think about the jobs that the national unemployment rate is a little like, it's important, but it's also like, it would be like analogous to going outside in your community and saying, well, what's the national temperature? No one goes outside and thinks about there's no national temperature.
Right.
Well, we don't track the national temperature. We track except for maybe some climate change things, right? We track what is the temperature of your local community. And even then, if you live in a big enough community, you don't care. Like, you want to know what your temperature is. You might differ by 10 degrees from somewhere else in your community, right? In a little microclimate that you have. So looking at local labor markets is super important. And that's why looking at granular local data is also important, and understanding the strengths and weaknesses of that data. So, and tracking the trends of what's happening in your economy compared to what's happening in your peer regions, to your state, to the national economy, and others globally if you compete with those as well. So I think that is why thinking globally, but acting locally and tracking data locally is vital in this whole world that we're living in.
Absolutely. And at the beginning, you mentioned that there were certain industries and certain regions of the country that were already experiencing this struggle. Which ones are they?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the industries because that really does inform everything that we're talking about here. And fundamentally, when we think about local labor markets or even the national labor market, we're driven by, all activity is driven at the industry level. Industries are simply collections of businesses cataloged by certain sectors. And so we outline this at the end of our report. You can see it. We go sector by sector. We don't major sectors we're talking about. We don't go into every single micro or individual industry code or things like that. But the major categories of where the storm is being felt the most right now are healthcare and construction. And then below that, we would say food and hospitality and utilities. Those are sectors, if you think about it, that it's really, really hard to find workers. We all know that. We hear about construction shortages. We hear about healthcare shortages. Sure. Utilities don't get as much mention, but they're vital. We all know utilities are vital. We partner with our utilities. Vital and really hard to, and food and hospitality became really at the epicenter of COVID. We heard a lot about, restaurants having to shut down, having fewer hours because of that. But there's a broader food and hospitality sector that services restaurants, that services grocery stores that are vital to that as well. So those are the industries at the center of the storm that we would say right now. And then there's other industries that go outside of that will be felt more and more. Industries like education and transportation, manufacturing, retail and trade that are feeling it as much, but they're still feeling it and they're going to feel it more. And so what I would say for the regions that if your region is really heavily reliant on healthcare or heavily reliant on construction, utilities, or some major food, especially whether it's food manufacturing or just the food supply chain, you're probably feeling it more than those other regions that may be more tech-centered or finance-focused and aren't feeling it as much, except they are going to have concerns maybe more as AI and automation go.
Sure. Interesting. Wow. Well, Josh, how can somebody get this report? What do they need to do to read this report?
Yeah, you can go to lightcast.io, light and cast, that's CAST, one word, lightcast.io. And we have a Rising Storm download button right there at the top of our homepage, because this is a big deal. We're putting a lot of attention on this, so it's easy to download. We also have an audio book. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably like podcasts and audiobooks right on Spotify. If you go to Spotify and search the Rising Storm Lightcast, you'll find it. It's free audiobook on Spotify to listen to. We go chapter by chapter. We've adapted the report to be audio book focused. It's a great production. Our team did an awesome job on that. So you can go to Spotify or go to lightcast.io and you can download the report. And we also, like I said, we have separate section or separate reports, many little takeaway reports for higher education and government workforce leaders, and then a separate one for company and enterprise leaders as well. If you want to help your HR, your companies that you support, I recommend downloading that report to understand the kind of things that how we help those companies and how you can help them as well.
Excellent. Well, Josh, thank you so much for doing this, coming on and talking about this with me. I hope that we've gotten the point across. I hope that our listeners sort of understand the gravity of this situation. And I guess before we go, the report states that this goes on until 2030, 2032? How long does this go till? 2032, from 2024 to 2032, right?
Yeah.
So what happens in 2032? Why is it over?
Well, I don't think it's over as in it's over, but what we're saying there is that the eye to the story, like we're looking at that kind of time horizon, because we talked about the math of the boomers and the implications of the declining birth rate, where we're really going to start feeling it. But this is where, again, because I'm a little leery of major long-term future projections and people who look way out. But I think by that time, what we're saying is we're going to be really, really grappling with these problems and all feeling it. And at that point, like anything, until something smacks you in the face, you really, then it becomes the full effect happens. I think the community, what I'll leave you with and what I'll leave your listeners with, the communities that had started adapting now in 2032 will be like, oh, it won't be old news, but it'll be like something that they have really prepared for. It's similar to when you see the communities in the state of Florida has gotten really good at preparing for hurricanes, because they know they've been hit with them, maybe not massive 100-year, 1,000-year storms like Hurricane Milton, but they've been hit with hurricanes before. But if you went to, if you went to Idaho where I live, if we got hit by a hurricane, we would not know what to do because we don't get hurricanes here.
Right. Exactly. That's a very good analogy. Excellent. Well, Josh, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Econ Dev Show with Dane Carlson. If you're an economic developer who never stops learning, for more expert strategies, fresh insights, and new ideas to take your career, organization, and your community to the next level, visit us on the web at econdevshow.com.